A few weeks ago, I did something slightly unsettling. I calculated my life expectancy. In New Zealand, where I live, the average life expectancy for a man my age and background is around 83 or 84 years, which means that statistically speaking, I have only about 26 years left. Now, that number is only an average. It could be more, it could be less. But seeing it written down changes something. Because when you realize that your remaining time is measured not in decades without end, but in perhaps 25 or 30 years at most, different questions start to come up. Not the question of how long I will live, but the question of how we want the final chapters of our lives to unfold. Now, for most of us, that question becomes unavoidable when we start thinking about life beyond full-time paid work. In my case, by the time I become eligible for New Zealand's pension, I will have worked for over 40 years, actually closer to 44 years of full-time employment. And if any of us have worked that long, at that point it will be time. It will be past time, really. Not necessarily for idleness or laziness. There are many ways to use our time in the later decades of life, but certainly something different from the careers that have filled most of our waking hours since we were in our late teens or early 20s. But many of us delay thinking seriously about that transition, and I think we delay for two reasons. The first is the comforting illusion that time stretches out indefinitely, and the second is our reluctance to confront just how finite that time really is. As long as those two illusions remain intact, we can postpone the deeper questions, but once those blinkers lift, something else becomes possible too. We start to think about the next chapter of life more deliberately. And that was the approach that I wanted to take. Instead of starting with questions about material possessions, the size of a house, the location it was in, I began asking for something different. How do I want my life to feel? What kind of experiences matter? What kind of values do I want to guide the final chapters of my life? Because if we begin with the material things, the picture, of the house, the cars, the trips, we can quickly lock ourselves into a single narrow scenario. But if we begin with our values, there may be many different ways of living that honor those values. When I look closely at my own values, three things stood out. The first was love. And I mean love in the broader sense, compassion and connection with the people who matter, connection with our children or with aging parents in the last years we may have with them, with friends, and perhaps even the wider world around us. The second value was calmness. There is very little in life that benefits from panic, overreaction, or ready, fire, aim. Calmness creates the space for reflection, for better decisions, and a steadier way of moving through the world. And the third value, which ironically I briefly forgot while I was making this video, was wisdom. But wisdom in this context is really about discernment. It's the ability to step back and ask, what truly matters here? What choices will serve the arc of a life well lived? What values are important to you as you look forward? How will they guide your choices? I'm really curious about this, and please drop those in the comments below because the conversations are important. When you start from values such as love, calmness, and wisdom, something interesting happens. You begin to see that the future may not have to look like a slightly diminished version of your past. And this is where I think the comparison with a book or a novel is really helpful because if our lives are stories, then the later years are the final chapters. And in many books, those final chapters are where the characters finally realize themselves. They're where the deeper themes of the story become clear, where most of the meaningful transformations occur and the exciting stuff happens. So the question becomes, what do we want those chapters to contain for us? Now, for me, that question eventually led somewhere quite personal and unexpected. I've lived almost all my entire adult life in my country. I arrived here as a child at only 6 years old, and this country has given me everything: education, career, opportunity, a life. But when I began imagining the final chapters of my life, I found myself asking something difficult. Am I staying here because it's truly where I want my future to unfold, or simply because it's where my past has been? Now, for many of you, that question will have an easy answer because you may have deep roots, extended families nearby, grandchildren, communities that we might be woven into. And if that describes you, then in many ways you've always already answered the question I asked, because the love and connection you value are anchored in those relationships. So staying where you are is not inertia, it is core to you. But for others of us, the answer might not be so clear. Parents can pass away. Children can grow up and build lives of their own. Friendships evolve or drift apart. And when those ties loosen, something unexpected can happen. Space opens up. And with that space comes a possibility that many of us have never seriously considered before: the possibility of writing a genuinely new chapter. Not a smaller or reduced version of the life we used to have, but something that reflects the values we now understand more clearly and can carry forward. A life guided not by habit or inertia, but by love, calmness, and wisdom. And perhaps a willingness to ask honestly, maybe even courageously: the final chapters of my life are still being written. What do I want them to become? I'm Jared, and this channel is about our transitions and identity in our 50s and beyond. If that is a conversation that you are up for, then please like the video and consider subscribing. It makes a real difference.